York.
And the last time you were here, it was March 14th, 2020. We were not sitting this far apart. Cruise ships had just been docked at all ports. Flights from the UK and Ireland had been stopped. Only 50 people at that point had died.
The presidential campaign had just sort of paused, and nobody knew exactly what we were getting ourselves into. I remember we had a guest say maybe 150,000 people could die, and that seemed unthinkable at the time.
And here we are, upwards of 500,000. But good to be with you, and we do have a lot of news to cover for you this morning.
Yes, we do, and we have a team of reporters and analysts following the latest for you right now. We'll get to that breaking news of the missing submarine in just a minute, but first, the latest on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Johnson & Johnson vaccinations could resume as early as today after federal health officials lifted a pause on their usage, saying that the shot is safe, but they will include a new warning about potential blood clots for some people.
MSNBC's Corey Coffin has more for us this morning. Corey, good morning. Walk us through this decision.
Yeah, Lindsay and Garrett, good morning to both of you. So ultimately, this decision came down to weighing the benefits of the vaccine against the potential risks. And the acting FDA commissioner put out a statement when they finally made this vote final and said that ultimately they felt that the vaccine was safe and effective to bring back to market with that warning label about the potential risk for blood clotting. Now, according to our latest numbers, there were about 8 million doses given out before the national pause, with about 15 cases. So the new numbers show that it happens in about 1.9 people per million cases. It's a little bit higher than we had previously seen with the previous 6 million cases and 6 people. As scientists continue to monitor this, though, they do say that this is a higher risk for women 18 to 49 years old. So the vaccine could come back as soon as today. Johnson & Johnson has said that they are ready with some 9 million doses to bring back to market. But the question is whether or not people are going to want to get this vaccine now that it's coming back. Dr. Anthony Fauci weighed in on that last night. Listen to what he had to say.
There are a lot of people, and believe it or not, more than we would have imagined, who really like the idea about a single shot vaccine. People are saying they're sorry it was paused. They can't wait till it gets back because they'd rather have a single dose vaccine. That's the really important advantage of that, in addition to the cold chain issues and others. So it is a very effective vaccine, and it has some advantages depending upon the situation that you're in.
All right, so Lindsay and Garrett, the panel played around with several scenarios on potentially bringing this vaccine back, but ultimately decided on that warning label. And I have to note, it was not a unanimous vote. 10 members on the panel voted to bring it back, but 4 voted against it. 1 member lamenting the fact that there was not more emphasis on the risk to women ages 18 to 49 and more information being put out there into the public. But ultimately, the panel decided that the warning label was accurate and that people could speak with their doctors about which vaccine was best for them. And they feel that moving forward, the benefits of people getting this third vaccine are going to greatly outweigh the risk. That was the ultimate message here. And this, Lindsay.
Corey Coffin, thanks for starting us off. We want to dive a little bit further into this on the decision to lift the Johnson & Johnson pause. So joining us right now is Dr. Sharif El-Nahal. He's the president and CEO of University Hospital, and that is in New Jersey. He's also the former health commissioner for the state. And doctor, good morning. You know, we know about this J&J vaccine and its benefits, right? I mean, it's only 1 dose. That's helpful for a lot of people who don't like needles. Also, you know, for the homeless, for people maybe in rural areas that are hard to get to. Do you worry that this pause right here, which many health experts say shows that the process is working, will add to vaccine hesitancy?
Well, thank you so much for having me this morning. So I think it's an appropriate concern, but one that we're actually not seeing here in the city of Newark and potentially elsewhere. We're actually seeing folks even during the pause saying, hey, I want to get vaccinated, I prefer Johnson & Johnson. When do you think this decision is going to come down? Which is really interesting. There's a preference because there's a recognizable brand behind it, but also there's an interesting assessment on whether the pause actually increased hesitancy immediately after it was announced. And that poll showed that actually hesitancy went down. More people actually had confidence across different demographics and even political persuasions because folks were reassured that there is an adverse events reporting system system that is detecting something that's actually so rare, and that federal authorities, very importantly, actually put a pause immediately upon detecting it. And so I do think that message is getting through. Folks are paying attention to the details on vaccination and otherwise, and so that's all very encouraging.
Doc, there's been a lot of reaction to some comments made by Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson earlier this week. He basically questioned why everybody needs to get the shots if they work so well, and Dr. Fauci reacted to those comments yesterday. Take a listen to this.
What is the point? Of course, the science tells us that vaccines are 95% effective. So if you have a vaccine, quite honestly, what do you care if your neighbor has one or not?
Well, there's a pretty good reason. We have 567,000 people who've died so far in this country from this disease. That is a really, really good reason to get people vaccinated. How can anyone say that 567,000 dead Americans is not an emergency?
How widespread do you think that kind of thinking is, and what impact could that kind of rhetoric from an influential lawmaker have on folks who might be hesitant about getting the vaccine at all?
Well, I'd have to say my opinion on this is similar to Dr. Fauci's. Look, you have science that shows that your risk of getting COVID-19, even if you are vaccinated or if you are unvaccinated, goes down precipitously when you reach that threshold called herd immunity. Between 70 to 80%, scientists are estimating, of the population vaccinated. Until you're there, you're still going to get clusters of infection. You can still get COVID-19 if you've gotten these vaccines. A 5% risk across a population of over 300 million people, even if you're vaccinated, is higher than you would want. And so you do want your neighbors to be vaccinated, and everybody should be talking to their friends, families, loved ones about it, because the science shows that you have to vaccinate a certain threshold for everyone's risk to be lowered.
You know, and Doctor, they say that if one country is facing COVID-19, then all countries are. This is really a global problem. And we're seeing in India, for example, here's some footage from our partner Sky News, showing really how bad it is there. I mean, they're overwhelmed there at that hospital, running out of beds. Should this be a warning sign to the U.S. here that the pandemic still isn't over?
It's absolutely a warning sign for several reasons. So first of all, there are direct flights coming into Newark Airport, which is very close to where we are, from India all the time, going back. And in fact, the flights are increasing and travel is increasing. And so when you have major countries like the country of India have a unprecedented surge per capita, they have the worst in record for this pandemic, that's a problem, because folks with COVID-19 and potentially more severe variants of COVID-19 may be coming from other parts of the world back into the United States. The second thing is that much of the vaccine pharmaceutical production capacity is in India. When you have a workforce that's getting COVID and dealing with the same issues that the United States had to deal with last spring with absenteeism from work and what have you, that actually threatens the global supply chain for vaccines as well. And so it's concerning on multiple levels.
All right, Dr. Sharif El-Nahal, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much. And now back to that breaking news this morning.
More potential legal consequences this morning for Derek Chauvin. The DOJ reportedly considering additional charges against the former officer convicted of murdering George Floyd, this time for a 2017 incident.
This as more protests are expected today in the wake of two recent police shootings in Ohio and North Carolina. MSNBC's Shaq Brewster is in Minneapolis with more. And Shaq, first on Derek Chauvin, what are we learning?
Well, we know that Derek Chauvin is waking up again in that maximum security state prison about 30 minutes from where I'm standing right now. He's in one of the state's most secure prisons and one of the most secure units in that prison. And the focus here in Minneapolis continues to be on where does the community go from here. This is a week where you saw that range of emotions. You saw the conviction of Derek Chauvin on Tuesday, open celebrations after that conviction. On Wednesday, the Department of Justice launched that pattern and practice investigation against the Minneapolis Police Department. And then on Thursday, you saw Dante Wright, who was shot by a Brooklyn Center police officer who yelled taser, taser, taser before firing a single bullet. You saw Dante Wright laid to rest. But really across the country, Garrett, you're seeing a focus on policing as more and more communities are dealing with what they're calling relentless trauma. You see in Columbus, Ohio, the shooting of 16-year-old Ma'Khia Bryant. She had a knife in her hand during a police during an altercation when police arrived and shot and killed her. You saw protests there in Columbus. In Elizabeth City, North Carolina, you're seeing more protests after a man was killed. Andrew Brown was killed by an officer after they were serving a police warrant. Each of these instances, another round of pain, another round of protests, and another round of calls for police accountability. Listen to how one protester put it to us a little bit earlier. Now, back here in Minneapolis, we've been talking about the tension that was existing before the verdict came in. We know that city officials are saying you're going to start to see that protections, those what they're calling Operation Safety Net, you're going to start to see that start to scale back a little bit. We're already seeing the phasing out of the military presence. There were 3,000 National Guard members activated earlier this week, and now we're starting to see those boarded up windows come down. We're going to see the fencing, the barbed wire start to come down as the city moves to the next phase and tries to figure out where they go from here after a very emotional and very busy week here in Minneapolis. Garrett? Yeah, what a week for the Minneapolis community and for you. Shaq Brewster, thank you very much. And now to the nation's capital and the latest on the push for police reform in Congress. There's a new sense of optimism on both sides of the aisle that a compromise could be reached, but some sticking points remain. And the subject of the biggest one of them, qualified immunity for police officers.
NBC's Amanda Golden is on Capitol Hill. So Amanda, good morning to you. Where do things stand right now with negotiations?
Good morning, Lindsay and Garrett. As Garrett knows all too well, this issue of bipartisanship is something that's tossed around frequently on the Hill. It's nice in theory, it's tougher in actual reality, but we are starting to get those indications from both sides of the aisle that they could be working towards compromises around some really substantive police reform legislation. The bill that's on the docket right now is the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. It passed the House back in March, but then stalled in the Senate because it couldn't get those 10 Republican senators on board in order to break that 60-vote threshold. But there's some new elements here that could be moving it forward. Some private talks that are happening between Democratic Congresswoman Karen Bass, who sponsored that legislation in the House, with Republican Senator Tim Scott, as well as Democratic Senator Cory Booker. Their conversations are ongoing over elements of where they could find compromise. And while there are some issues here that they're not sure they could break through, whether it's banning chokeholds or banning no-knock warrants, the big flashpoint here is around qualified immunity, as Garrett mentioned. So whether or not officers could be sued and have that legal protection over immunity for their cases. What Democrats are saying is that they want to push forward. They want to see that accountability held. Republicans saying that they are worried it would stop new recruits coming in for police departments over fear of financial risk and not wanting to be sued and having to deal with the consequences for incidents that take place. What Senator Scott is now proposing to Democrats is, what if instead of holding the specific officers responsible, you could actually just hold the law enforcement, the police stations, the overall enforcement responsible instead of those individuals. That's something that could now broker potential breakthroughs in these conversations. And what we heard from Democratic Congresswoman Karen Bass, to our colleagues here, was that she is trying to update House Speaker Nancy Pelosi on the status of these conversations as they move forward towards a breakthrough. Take a listen to what she told our colleague just yesterday about those talks.
I am hoping very much after a few more days, hopefully we can get to the point of actually formalizing negotiations. Still not quite there, but I think we have to resolve a few things, continue our discussions, but hopefully, my fingers crossed, hopefully we're very close.
And Democrats are warning that just because there is that guilty verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial, that doesn't substitute substantive legislation that could move things forward. And so Democrats in the Senate do need to bring on those 10 Republicans in order to break that 60-vote threshold, as I mentioned. But here, that's where Senator Tim Scott is very influential. He could bring other Republicans on board in order to inch things forward.
All right, Amanda, we will continue to cover this throughout the morning. Thank you for your reporting.
And coming up next, we're going to talk to Susan Bro, the mother of Heather Heyer, an anti-racism protester killed in that infamous Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville back in 2017. We'll get her reaction to new GOP-led laws that would give immunity to drivers who hit and kill protesters. And could Vladimir Putin's nemesis make a full recovery? An update on Alexei Navalny after his 24-day hunger strike. Imprisoned Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny says he is ending his hunger strike, following warnings from doctors that he could die. Navalny's been refusing food since March 31st in an effort to get better medical care after he says he started losing feeling in his arms and legs. In an Instagram post, he confirmed he has now been checked twice by doctors not affiliated with the prison. Navalny's doctors now demand that he be transferred to a better-equipped Moscow hospital. The opposition leader was arrested in January after returning from Germany, where he had spent 5 months recovering from a poisoning that he blames on the Kremlin, which Russian officials deny. President Biden and the European Union announced sanctions against Russia for the poisoning and detention of Navalny.
New developments in Republican-led efforts to crack down on protesters amid growing calls for police reform.
The state of Oklahoma is now the latest to pass a law granting drivers civil and criminal immunity for unintentionally hurting or killing protesters while trying to flee. A similar measure passed Iowa's Republican-led House. They follow Florida's anti-riot bill, which grants civil immunity to drivers who hit protesters who are blocking roads.
According to New York Times, GOP lawmakers in 34 states have introduced 81 anti-protest bills this year, more than twice as many as any other year. Heather Heyer was killed in 2017 when a man drove into a group of counter-protesters demonstrating against a Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. Her mother, Susan Breaux, joins us now. Susan, good morning. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
You know, I looked up the website for your daughter's foundation, and on that website it says that Heather embodied the spirit of the civil rights movement by speaking out for justice and equality. Tell us why it was so important for her to peacefully protest that day. I mean, that rally, by the way, we should mention, drew hundreds of white supremacists that day in 2017.
Heather and her friends were a part of a large group that stayed away from the violence that day. They were on the opposite side of the downtown mall. Heather would tell you herself she was a lover, not a fighter. For her to even be out on a hot August day when she had to bartend that evening, she was dressed all in black for that, had her hair pulled back, had a shift that she was supposed to go to, probably what she assumed would be right afterward, not knowing at that time that the restaurant was closed. But that tells me how much it meant to her to be there just to show up. But she was afraid of the violence, honestly. She was not a violent person.
Susan, the man who murdered your daughter was sentenced to life in prison. I wonder what you make when you hear about a law like this that might have given immunity to someone who could have essentially made this argument that he was somehow in fear for his life or something when he was trying to get out of this protest. What's your reaction to these laws?
Well, first off, it wouldn't have applied to him. The defense tried that in court, and it was proven that there was no one around him when he chose to drive into the crowd, so he couldn't have used that defense. But I just wonder, have the legislators really thought this through? So if you're giving qualified immunity to people who attack with a car and who claim self-defense, I believe there were already laws in place that would have covered that situation. Do we next say baseball bats have qualified immunity? Do we next say guns have qualified immunity? You know, where do we draw the line at what weapons people are given permission to use to attack counter-protesters and protesters? Do we really think three people together for a similar purpose create a riot? There was a peaceful protest in Charlottesville this past week. 5 women stood silently in a semicircle close together in a park with signs supporting Black Lives Matter. According to these new laws, that would have been a riot. That would have been something that was actionable. They could have gone to jail for at least 48 hours. I mean, our country has long had protests.
Absolutely.
I see that there are concerns for property damage and loss of life, and yet I believe there were already laws in place to cover those. I'm not sure, other than a desire to prevent people protesting Black Lives Matter, that these laws were put in place. Well, I just don't see that there's been any need for them.
I'm glad you mentioned the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, we've been watching these protests all around the country, particularly from people who feel like maybe there's no other way to make their voices heard. I wonder if you think laws like this might deter people from coming out and raising their voices when they need to be heard.
Oh, absolutely. That's the intent of the law. What were formerly misdemeanor charges are now going to be felonies. Once you have a felony on your record, you have become an underclass citizen. You have a hard time finding housing, jobs, banking. I mean, your life is trashed in so many ways. The new Jim Crow book, the update, addresses that issue a lot, how you become an underclass of citizens. So there's a deliberate effort here to threaten. There's a deliberate effort to silence and push people into the background. We don't want to hear about it. That's what they're saying.
Well, Susan Bro, we certainly appreciate you coming on and speaking with us about this issue and all the work you continue to do on behalf of your daughter. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you for having me.
In Orlando this weekend for their annual retreat amid questions about the future of their party. Some Republicans are worried that an unfolding power struggle between former President Trump and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell could damage the party and hurt their chances of retaking the House and the Senate. Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who's running the retreat, says it will focus on getting the GOP back to conservatism at its core. Cheney told reporters this week she didn't invite the former president. Joining us now with more is Olivia Troy, director of Republican Accountability Project and a former top advisor to Vice President Mike Pence. Olivia, what's the potential damage for the Republican Party if Republican leadership, elected leadership, can't find common ground with their most popular former elected leader, Donald Trump?
Well, I think it puts the Republican Party in a very difficult spot going forward. I think it's, right now we're in a situation where Trumpism continues to, I would say, cause grave damage to the future of the GOP. It's discrediting the party every single day. And I think going forward, you'll see that I think Republicans are going to lose elections because of their inability to govern and their constant shenanigans and their political stunts with really playing disregard for what perhaps Republican voters really want.
Olivia, hey, it's Lindsay here. We know Joe Biden obviously won the election, and we are now approaching his 100th day in office.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that out loud.
The fact that we need to. But my home state, got to bring them in, Arizona, the GOP-led Senate started a recount of the November ballots. By the way, only for two of the offices that Democrats won. The Senate race that Mark Kelly won, of course, the presidential race that Joe Biden won, both taking the state there. So the state Senate ordered this audit. It's being carried out by a Florida company called Cyber Ninjas, but there have been a lot of security concerns raised here. In fact, a court almost paused the entire recounting here. But what does this tell you that not only this audit is happening, but it's only those two races?
Well, I think that we're seeing the page out of the Trump playbook play itself out here. It's nothing but a political stunt that I'm sure that they are using to fundraise off of, and it's anti-democratic. And I think it's very un-American to go about it in this way. If they really wanted to actually try to engage and claim, pursue these claims that it is not a partisan hit here, they would have a nonpartisan committee observing. They would be looking at the integrity of the process here. But when you have a company running an election audit that has been part of Stop the Steal narrative, I think you have a serious problem on the credibility of your scam.
I mean, what does this say about the current state of the Republican Party? Does this just show kind of a fundamental lack of seriousness?
Yeah, I think it shows that there's great division. You have these bad actors who really have a hold on the Republican Party right now, and I think it's time. I am grateful for people like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger who are out there fighting for really the soul of the party and trying to do what's right and get back to governing so that we have a functioning political party in our two-party system right now, because clearly right now we don't.
And lastly, I want to hop in the Wayback Machine here for a minute. You reminded us this unbelievable moment took place a year ago.
And then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number of the lungs.
You were in the room next to the briefing room that day. I'm wondering, what was your reaction then, and what are you thinking now as we kind of revisit this last year and that moment?
Yeah, at the moment, it was shock. I could not believe that I had just heard those words come out of the president's mouth at the time. And I also thought how fundamentally dangerous it was, because we've seen a track record of his supporters following his words, and they take action on them. And I thought, somewhere out there are going to be Americans that are going to be ingesting and swallowing bleach, and we're going to have to clarify the record. And I can't believe that we actually have to do this during a massive crisis where he just threw everything, all of the work that we had done, out the window. And now we're actually going to have to focus on putting clarifying statements out to say, please don't do this. This is dangerous. It's harmful. It's going to hurt you. And, I think looking back at it today, I'm just so relieved that we don't have that right now in the Oval Office, that we have someone that takes the office seriously, that understands that words matter and that leadership matters. But I think it's a stark reminder. I think, I understand the sentiment of wanting to move on and not talk about Trump. But I think we need to remember moments like that to make sure that someone like him, or him, since he keeps, hinting that he might run in 2024, does not hold office or power again, because we can see how dangerous that is when people like him get in situations like that. Elections have consequences.
Olivia Troy with the reminder, bleach is not for breakfast. Thank you.
Coming up, positive approval ratings for President Biden as he prepares for his first joint address to Congress. We're going to dive into what we can expect to hear. And later on the Cross Connection, Housing Secretary Marcia Fudge on her crucial role as the administration approaches its 100th day. She joins Tiffany Cross at 10 a.m. Eastern.
First address to Congress on Wednesday will be the toughest ticket in Washington. It is invite only, and it comes as he completes his first 100 days in office. But due to COVID restrictions, just 200 people total will be allowed inside the House chamber. NBC White House reporter Lauren Egan is in Delaware with more for us. And Lauren, what new do we actually expect to hear from the president in this big speech on Wednesday night?
Good morning, Garrett. Well, President Biden is expected to use this speech to unveil the second part of his plan to kind of overhaul and reshape the American economy. Now, this is on top of the American Jobs Plan, which he unveiled a few weeks ago. And this plan, which the administration is calling the American Families Plan, is aimed at things like universal pre-K, expanding access to childcare, and establishing some sort of national standard for paid family leave. Now, this plan is expected to come in at roughly $1.5 trillion, and the White House has said that they're considering a number of options in order to pay for it, mostly aimed at taxing that top income level of tax earners. It should be noted that, as you mentioned, Wednesday's speech is going to look a lot different for two main reasons. One, there will only be 200 people in the room, and two, this is going to be the first time in U.S. history where two women will be standing behind President Biden as he speaks to Congress, and that will, of course, be Speaker Pelosi and Vice President Harris.
Love that little bit of history there. Lauren Egan, thank you very much.
Coming up in our next hour, Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz reportedly finds himself in full damage control mode.
We'll dive into his PR spending blitz that included a hefty payment to Roger Stone. You're watching MSNBC Reports.